is full of it, getting pumped up on the little bright things I want. But I know they'll never own me.
Hey guys, it's Jack, and I've got my next build video for you. My stats are distributed 17, 16, 16. I've done it this way so I can keep my stats even, and I can play around with my gear enchantments, putting my stats where I want them without having to retrait my attributes all the time. For this build, I've aimed on getting my max magicka and stamina to around 1850 because they start to overcharge pretty close to higher than that. And then my max health, I'm getting it as high as possible, and I'll show you why for this build. My magicka recovery and stamina recovery are both really high, which I really like, and then the health recovery is okay, but it's not too terribly important. I am running a full set of medium armor here, and I have the Pact set on here. I like the Pact set a lot because it reduces the cost of breaking CC by 30%, and when you break CC, you become immune to more CC for a portion of time. Now this is really nice because it's like having a free stability as long as you stun break as soon as you get stunned. So if you're quick with your fingers and you're paying attention, you'll be able to maintain stability as long as possible, and it won't cost you too terribly much stamina. For my other armor, I'm running 2 light pieces, and those pieces are the gloves of Hunding's Rage and the belt. And then my weapons are a great sword and a bow, and those are both of Hunding's Rage. The reason I chose this set in particular is because of the stamina recovery. And then for my amulets, I'm running a Warlock set. It's just V1 right now. I haven't been able to find any V10 pieces, and I'm not V12 yet to get the V12 stuff. Now, because I am running medium armor, I have a very high weapon critical. And this is really nice. This makes this build hit really hard, and it becomes kind of a DPS Templar. My weapon damage is at 165, which is nearing 170, which is when it starts to overclock. And then I've got a decent amount of spell resistance and armor, not too terribly tanky, but that's not too important for this build. This is a more offensive, kind of quick gameplay style, and I'm moving as fast as I can, dishing out as much damage as I can. For this build, I normally run Invigorated Honey Pudding, but I did manage to get myself Consummate Honey Pudding, which is a lot better because you get bonus 150 health out of it when you do the math. For the potions I use, I like to use the Panacea of Health. The reason I like this is because it is still a full restore potion. I have the spell and weapon power, and I just haven't really liked them that much because this build already hits really hard. For the boons I run with this build, I run the Thief boon, and that's for my bonus critical chance. So let's start with my greatsword. I've got my Executioner on there, and I love Executioner because as your opponent's health starts to drop, it starts to hit really hard, and on my high critical hit chance, I can deal a ton of damage with this move. Once they start to hit 50% health is when I'll start using Executioner. I won't use it beforehand normally. And the reason is once they hit 50%, this move starts to hit a base damage of about 350, and then it just scales higher and higher, and you can easily crit over 1k if they drop below 20% health. The next move I use is Toppling Charge. I like Toppling Charge because it's a great gap closer, and you get a knockdown on your opponent. Explosive Charge is great because you can get an interrupt on your opponent if they're casting a skill, and you do the AoE damage, but for this particular build I chose Toppling Charge because I like to have the for sure knockdown if I'm going to hit something. My next skill on my bar is Blazing Spear. Blazing Spear is great because it deals a good amount of AoE damage, and when you drop it, it stuns one random target for 2 seconds again. So that's another stun that I can drop in a group of people, and if I drop 2 or 3 of them on top of a group of 2 or 3 people, chances are I'll stun all of them. My next skill is Blinding Flashes. Now, Blinding Flashes is probably one of the best defensive and offensive Templar skills. Now, defensively it's so strong because if you blind someone, they have 5 seconds of missing you. So the way this blind works is they have a 50% chance to miss. Once they do miss, they're set off balance. And from my experience, once someone's set off balance, they won't hit you until they are finally back on balance again, or the debuff is gone. So what happens with this skill is when they miss, they become pretty useless in combat for any kind of damage output until the debuff is gone. The next skill that I use is Blazing Shield, and I love this skill. It is so powerful in PvP combat, and it scales so nicely for PvP. Now the reasons that I like this build is because as your health gets higher, the shield that you generate is stronger, and the more people around you, the shield that you generate becomes stronger as well. So this shield returns 50% of the damage you take once the effect ends. So that also counts if you activate the shield and they destroy it within 1 second. They're taking 50% of however much shield strength you have. So I have 2,600 hit points for this build. So when I pop the shield, I'm going to get an 800 damage point shield, and when it breaks, it's going to deal AoE 400 damage to everyone around me. Now, a couple of things to note about this bar before I move on to my next bar. I did learn that some of your skills in your Aedric Spear tree go off your weapon critical, not your spell critical. Toppling Charge is a skill that goes off your weapon critical, and Blazing Spear is also a skill that goes off your weapon critical. Blazing Shield, however, does not go off your weapon critical, it goes off your spell critical. So you have the option of not running Blinding Flashes for this build if you wanted to, because Blazing Shield can deal a lot of damage and protect you really well. Instead of Blinding Flashes, you could replace it with Inner Light, which would increase your spell critical by 20% chance. Blazing Shield does crit when it breaks. So if I have Inner Light on, I have Blazing Shield at a 27% crit chance. So that means that instead of dealing 400 AoE damage, if the critical pops, it'll deal 600 AoE damage. I have had this skill crit up to 1,200 damage. Now the way that it did this was when I activated the shield, it hit a lot of targets, so I got a much stronger shield than 800. And then when the shield broke, it crit, and I hit over 1,200 damage with it. So this skill here, mixed with Inner Light, can be incredibly strong. For my ultimate for this build, I'm running Crescent Sweep. Now, the reason I like to run Crescent Sweep is because it is an extremely cheap ultimate, and it generates really fast, especially on a critical build, because you generate ultimate as you make critical hits and as you use your skills and AoE skills. Skill like Crescent Sweep, you take my 400 base magic damage that it will deal, and if my opponent's in front of me, you times that by 33%. 33% of 400 is over 150. So with rough math, that's around 550 damage on a 30% critical chance. This means that with Crescent Sweep crits, I can hit 700 to 800 damage with it, and on top of that, it is an Aedric Spear skill, so I do have my Burning Light that can put almost another 200 damage on top of that, which also has critical potential. For my next weapon, I'm running a bow, and these are the skills that I run on my bow line. I use the bow mostly defensive in this build, and it works really great because you have a lot of range with it, and the Templar have some really great passive heals and abilities to play defensively with any weapon. The first skill that I run on this bar is Venom Arrow, and I like this skill because it has a decent amount of base damage, and it has a high critical potential with the plus 5% from the bow. This skill also applies a damage over time. Venom Arrow also has an interrupt, which works really well if you're fighting a sorcerer or any other kind of ranged enemy that is channeling skills to deal damage to you. The next skill I run is Reflective Light. You could run Vampire's Bane, which is the other morph. It just adds an additional damage over time. But I'm running Reflective Light at the moment just for a little bit of more AoE control and damage. The next skill that I run is Extended Ritual. I really like Extended Ritual because it gives you an area of zone control and it purifies conditions off of you. And then the next skill that I run is Channeled Focus. Now, I really like Channeled Focus again. It's a very defensive skill. It gives you a huge armor and spell resistance buff. It overcharges my armor and spell resistance with this particular build at over 2200. Channeled Focus also recovers magicka over time. Now, the tooltip says 5 here, but when I activate Channeled Focus, it actually recovers 10 magicka every 0.5 seconds. So at 177 magicka cost, it gives me over 300 magicka over the 17 seconds that it lasts. So it has been buffed in a recent patch. They didn't fix the tooltip for it, but it's an extremely good skill now, and it's really great if you want to maintain yourself. And then I've got my heal Honor the Dead on this bar. Now the reason that I don't carry the heal on my other bar is because when I'm spamming the Blazing Shield to keep myself alive, it deals a lot of AoE damage. It's a lot cheaper than Honor the Dead, and I don't necessarily need to heal myself a lot when I have my Blazing Shield up. I have Honor the Dead on this bar, so if I need a spike heal, I can switch to this bar and activate Honor the Dead. Also, when I'm using my bow, I can't use Blazing Shield because in order for it to do damage, I need to be next to my target, and the whole point of running my bow is to be away from my opponent. For the ultimate on this build, I run Solar Disturbance. It's a great AoE control and a snare. I sometimes run Soul Strike as well. I don't have Soul Strike morphed yet, but it's a very strong single target ultimate, and it doesn't have too terribly high of a cost. Both of these ultimates are ranged ultimates, and that's why I have them on my ranged setup. So here's a 1 versus 1 fight. I start by opening with my Extended Ritual and my Channeled Focus. Next I go with my Venom Arrow followed by Vampire's Bane to put some dots on him, and I channel auto attacks in it as well. After laying my initial dots, I switch to my Greatsword and pop my Sun Shield and charge right into him, knocking him down. At this point he's bolt escaping to try to kite away from me, but I try to stay on him, and as soon as I get back in range I use my Gap Closer and knock him over again, and I see his hit points start to drop, so I start to follow up with my execution. I do, however, manage to stay on top of him and keep up, and I finish him off. This next fight, I fight quite a few opponents for a rather long amount of time, and it just showcases how you can survive with this build and keep yourself alive. After opening with a Gap Closer in my ultimate, another sorcerer drops a Soul Assault on me, and I start to take a lot of damage from it. I do manage to pop my Sun Shield in time and mitigate a bit of the damage, and then I go straight back to the sorcerer that I opened on and keep putting the pressure on him, and I manage to finish him off with some executioners. Quickly Gap Close into his friend and then right back into him, and I keep the pressure on him. He bolt escapes again and stuns me, and I take the stun. Noticing that I'm low on resources, I roll behind the pillar, line of sighting, and I drop my Extended Ritual and my Channeled Focus. Seeing that my potion's back up, I switch back to my Greatsword and come back out, and I Gap Close right into the other sorcerer again, knocking him over, and I quickly put a lot of damage into him with my ultimate and don't manage to get the Executioner off in time to take him down. The other sorcerer starts blasting me on the hill, and I dodge roll his Crystal Shards. I do, however, take a Crystal Shards from behind and get knocked over. I'm outnumbered and in the open on the hill, so I pop my Sun Shield to mitigate damage and spike my opponents with it. And the Sun Shield effectively dispatches one of them. At this point, it's just me and my two opponents on this hill, and I do something really stupid here. They both escape away from me, and I end up retreating backwards. Better for me to keep the pressure on my opponents than retreat, but I end up running backwards, and I don't activate my Sun Shield, and I take too much damage and get killed. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It's a very aggressive Templar playstyle, and it was a lot of fun to make and play.